All right, cool. So for today's training, what we're planning to go through is recreating this election map. And so what we're going to learn in this session is one, how to graph geospatial content. So using latitude and longitude data to actually plot things onto a map. Secondarily, we're going to learn about filters within the Flow platform. So how do you apply a filter? And then third, we're also going to be looking into color gradients and how do you adjust color. And so those are the main topics for today, which should be plenty to go through. And so this is sort of a little bit of a step up, but still not too far out there that it's going to be overwhelming for people. And so the main visualization here, and actually what I'll do is I'm going to click this little invite button. And when I click that invite button, it actually pops up this QR code, which you can scan with your phone, but I'm going to just paste this URL into the chat window. And so you guys can all join me in this immersive session and actually sort of fly around with me and view it that way. And I'll see you guys jumping in here in a second, but as you join, I'll keep talking this through. But this first perspective, which we'll build, is essentially a county level map. In the northeast corner, it's more on a township level, but this is essentially which party, so Democrat or Republican, actually won that county. So it's on a local basis, not on a state basis here. And so when you look at it this way, this was a graph that was very popular in 2016 when we were showing, when Trump sort of showed this view of the U.S. and most of the U.S. looked red. And in that case, that's this view, in that perspective. And I'm going to move on to the next perspective, which in this perspective, we are now adjusting for the number of votes cast in that county or in that precinct. And so when you look at it that way, it shows a different story, right? That it's more the cities or these population centers are more Democrat leaning. And so it sort of adjusts that, the argument that was posted after that was that, people vote, land doesn't vote. And that was sort of the main message there. And then I'm going to extend that a little further. This is a little moving more into flow territory, which is, all right, now we're going to adjust the colors such that we're not looking at it just from that perspective of binary red or blue, but instead show what is the actual gradient of left-leaning or right-leaning. And in that case, it tells a different story, right? So we're continuing adding layers to this story, and that's really what we're going to dive through today. And then lastly, that we can actually change this view so that instead of looking at the height of the bar as the number of votes, we can actually look at the size of the dots as the number of votes as well. And this is how you can see in the northeast corner, it's on a township level, so those dots are tiny over there. So that explains that a little bit. And then lastly, that we can also do both. So we're adjusting for height and the size of the dot based on the number of votes. So pretty simple data set, but you can see how many different layers we can start to add in here and how each perspective starts to tell a different story. So that's going to be the main objective for today as we dive through this. And it's wonderful to see everyone in the environment and everyone's avatars moving around and pointing at things. And we might cover, if we have time, these overlay text where as you roll over, you'll see additional details pop up. So if we have time, we'll jump into that as well. So before I jump in any further, any initial questions, thoughts, concerns before we dive in? All right. You guys excited for this one? I think this one's pretty fun. Kind of a fun one to do. Great. Yep. All right. Awesome. So for those that are new, sort of how we're going to go through this, or the main structure, is that we are just going to be passing the baton. So we're going to have one person share their screen, and they're going to drive for basically one step, and then we're going to pass it to someone else, and they're going to drive. So that way everyone gets a little bit of participation, and we can see where everyone's at, and we'll learn together. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into the editor itself. So in the chat window, what I'm going to do is put that's the same URL. I'm going to put a link to the data file. So I'm going to have everyone click on that link. And once you have that link, which is to this Google Sheets, you'll see that this was the preliminary results, the election results as of November 7th. So I think it was that Saturday after Alaska turned over or gave some of their results. So this is not final data. Don't look at this as final confirmed data, but rather point in time from a source from Thomson Reuters. And this was actually coming from Kaggle, which is a really good data source or repository. If you guys are not familiar with it, that's a good resource to point to for finding pretty good data sets and other things data science related. So I'll put that in the chat window as well. Great. So from this, I'm just going to quickly talk through what the data is showing. And you guys have the benefit of sort of getting this clean data. And at one point in the future, we'll talk more about how you do that data cleansing process and some of the additional fields that typically you want to add. And that's often, I'd say, the hardest part of using Flow is sometimes getting your data in the right form for then making these flows really easy. And I think as we go through more and more of these, that will start to become apparent. So some of the things that are necessary here, because we're looking at a county level, right now we're dependent on basically finding the latitude and longitude for those locations. We do have a certain capability for certain regions when we can just list out the state. So we can put all the states and we can be able to place dots specifically at the center of that state. And we could add maps that have county levels and other things, but for right now, the easiest path forward when you have very specific details is to look at it on a latitude and longitude basis. And so there's lots of lookups you can do. You can even go to Google Maps to find things like that. The other thing to note here, and you'll notice this is similar to what we did last time, which is that for Republicans and Democrats, since there's very highly associated colors with them, that we can actually define the color in a column called color. So that's that hexadecimal value that you're seeing in this color field, column I. This is coming from a different data set, or this is the sort of cleansed version of something else, which is why this column called winner is there, since we only want to plot the person that actually won, as opposed to all of the different candidates for each of the counties. So we can get into that. And then this combined column is actually something was using for the actual labels, where it's a combination of the state plus the county for the actual label when we roll over the text. The candidate that won, the county, the state's pretty straightforward. And this is the number of votes that were actually cast in that county. And then lastly, this is that percentage of the vote that the person won by. And then this is if they were Democrat, so this is the percentage Democrat. And so that's what we use for that color gradient, where we can say how Democrat was it, and so that's how blue it will be. Otherwise, it will defer back to red. So there's a small little nuance or error here where I will account that we are not accounting for independent votes in this percentage Democrat, which I will say it's not perfect on that regard. So just something to note. But any questions around the data before we dive into the actual visualization part? All right. Cool. So let's get it kickstarted. So let's download that as a CSV. So file, download CSV, and then I'm going to pass it to. Let's just go in that same. Or actually, yeah, let's go in that same order. So Joe, if we can start with you, and then we'll go around the horn.
Absolutely.
So I will. Great. So, Joe, if I can get you to share your screen.
It should be heading your way now.
Okay. Let me just have a different window. Okay, perfect. I see it. Great. Awesome. Okay, so you're in the platform, so we'll click on Create Flow. Yep. And then title. So this is something where you actually don't have to fill it in. You don't have to put something in. And so it's something you can change later, but let's just call this preliminary election results or election results. Perfect. And then we'll click on create. Perfect. Great. And one thing I'm going to ask you to do is actually, can you close the other tab that has the presidential results in it? And the reason I'm requesting that is that if you haven't noticed, so Flow does use some level of resource on your computer, and so if you have multiple flows open, sometimes it can impact your performance. So that's the only reason why there. Okay, cool. So what we'll start off with is we're going to create a map. And so click on map and then create new. Perfect. And so we start with this sphere. And do you guys have a preference? Would you prefer to keep it a sphere or actually, since it's just the US, let's show just the US map. So instead of topology world, we'll say, yes, perfect. So US, and this will be a flat map. And so that width, if you can recall from last time, the numbers are all in meters. So this was literally will be a meter wide. And so that's something to account if you are trying to build that AR experience. And so I would, for this, let's make it just a little bigger. So let's make the width 2 meters. Perfect. And then if you can actually scroll down, and one thing that, this is sort of my design preference, but I think works better. If you can click on rotation, and this is underneath positioning, is what we're going to do is rotate this so it's sort of flat. And so to do that, you're going to want to move the horizontal to -90. Perfect. There we go. And so you'll notice that it turns into this sort of flat plane. And then let's actually move it down a little bit. And so let's move it down maybe 0.2 meters. And so you can either click and drag that green arrow down like you're doing there, perfect, or use the up-down position knob or the actual, you can type into that value field. So
More than this, or is this right?
that should work. And we can always move it so it's not set in stone there.
Sure.
Great. And then if you can click and move the camera so that it's looking down at the map. So yeah, just click anywhere and just drag your mouse down. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so it's just moving the camera so we can see it a little more clearly. And the reason I say that is so if you hit that set camera button in the very top left-hand corner, it will just set that first default camera position. Otherwise, when you go into the scene, you're going to be loaded in a sort of a weird spot in some sense. Cool. So we have the map there now. I'm going to pause there. Has everyone been able to create a map and rotate that map? And any questions there?
Okay, got it.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do next is actually create a swarm and plot that to the map. So let's click on swarm. Yep, you got it. Create new, perfect. And then, so I forgot to click data first, but that's fine. This is good to do it from here too. So you'll see that there's an upload button right next to it. So if you forget to click on data like I just did, you can click on that upload button directly and yep, exactly. And so we'll choose the file, the CSV file that we just downloaded a moment ago. Perfect. There we go. So we start off with this, random collection of dots. So it always starts out that way, so you can see your data. But let's actually move it into sort of the right perspective. And I think we're at a pretty good spot. Joe, you're killing it, or rocking it. So I'm going to move on here and I'm going to pass over the buck over to Ed. And Ed, if you want to pick it up from here, and we'll start actually transitioning this to a...
Yeah, okay. I hope I followed along here. It might be a little big, but okay.
Oh, good. No, you're good. And actually to zoom out, so to say, you're going to want to use the scroll wheel on your mouse. And so to scroll backwards, and you'll basically zoom out a bit. There you go.
Right there, is that better?
That's perfect. And then go ahead and click that set camera button, and that way when you go back into the scene, it'll stay there. And the set camera button is up in the top left. Perfect right there. You got it.
Okay, great.
Awesome. And so now what we'll do is underneath chart type, we're going to change chart type from random, which is what you're seeing, that random collection of dots in a 1 by 1 by 1 meter cube, and move that to a map from coordinates. And we're using coordinates because we have the latitude and longitude values. And so we're going to select map 1. Perfect. Latitude, we'll select latitude. Yep. Longitude, we'll select long. And if you have data, and when you click those drop downs, you don't see latitude and longitude visible, it means that you have potentially like an NA or some text field or something in the actual data file that's not a number, or it's a number that's way outside the bounds of what latitude and longitude is. So latitude and longitude, I think latitude goes from -90 to plus 90, and longitude goes -180 to 180. I could be incorrect on the latitude, sorry, but longitude is definitely -180 to 180. So just something to keep into account if you're not seeing those drop downs. Great. So now we've plotted each of these points. And since we're here, I'm just going to quickly show you why we're using latitude and longitude for this and what you could also do. So if you click on type, instead of clicking type map from coordinates, go ahead and click on the map to regions. And then click on using map 1. Yep. And then region column is state. Great. And so the reason I'm showing you this is that this is using the field of states and basically plotting every one of those dots to the center point of those state. So even though it looks like it's one dot, it's actually every county in that one dot. And so if you click on the stack,
is it summing up by state, Michael?
It's not aggregating the data, but it is putting all the dots there. And so if you click that stack button right underneath the offset, you'll see the stack of dots start to come out. So those are all of the dots stacked on top of each other. So, yep. So anyway, I just wanted to quickly show you that. We're not going to use that to build it, but that way at least you see how that can work. And that's actually what I was using to do the electoral college. So, you can map how many electoral votes each state gets, and you'd want to stack those on top of one another in the center of the state. And that was pretty effective there. Great.
Gotcha.
All right, so for now what we'll do is the only other change we're going to make on this view is to change the colors. And so we're going to use the color that's in the data set already. So what we'll do is if you scroll down, Ed, right underneath sizes, there's a, scroll down on the left-hand side. There you go.
Yep, color.
Yep, and so underneath color, we're going to select column in data. And so this is that field that we defined in our spreadsheet using hexadecimal values. And yeah, if you click on color there, it will basically update these dots to be the color that we defined in the spreadsheet itself. So this should look familiar. This is that first view that we initially built. Some small details here, you might want to increase the size of those dots so that it's not 0.05, maybe just a little bit larger so you can see it more clearly. But otherwise, we're pretty much set to go. And sizes is that, right there. You got it.
So what could we move it up to, Michael?
I'd say like 0.01 or 0.008. Yeah, that works. So it just takes up a little more area. I think that looks good. So cool. So we have created the first view here, which is of the map and sort of that standard view of every county. So let's go ahead and click on Add Step. And I'm going to pass the baton over to Michael. Michael, if you can start sharing your screen.
Got it. So I think I kind of missed something in the last step. So I think I did something and then all my colors went away for some reason. I don't know if I accidentally pressed something incorrectly, but
all good. This is the benefit actually of all of us being on the call, because we can all experience the bugs together, or the error. So cool. So we're missing dots. So if you can scroll up on that side. Okay. So you have latitude, longitude, color, and data. Yep. I think the dots are just too small. So 0.001 is quite small, but if you make that not that one, underneath sizes, it says size single value. If you take out one of those zeros.
Oh, okay, that's what I did.
Yep. So yeah, just a little too small. And what you're doing actually is a little bit of a trick to keep in mind, is that if you want something to be invisible in some sense, and this has to do when you do like connections, and you just want to see the bar, but you don't really want to see the dot on top of the bar, you can just set the size to something really small, and it's equivalent to sort of being invisible without having to impact the visibility.
Michael, is that really saying that dot size is 1/100 of an AR meter?
I think
Not the right
so.
way to think about it.
I
Okay.
think so. I'm not sure if it's I think it's the diameter of it. Um,
Okay,
should
gotcha.
be. Good question though. So that'd be a centimeter. Point zero. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's accurate. I can actually test it. If we go to AR, we can actually test it, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And my personal take on AR scenes is that between 0.01 and 0.015 seems to work well to be able to visibly see the dots, but then not be too large. So that's sort of my personal preference, but we can always change that. Okay, great. And so, Michael, if you haven't already, are you on the second step? Or are you on the first
I
step?
don't think I have created a new.
Okay, yep. So let's go ahead and click on Add Step. Perfect. And so the way you'll know you did is click by seeing that train track. And the reason that it looks like everything went blank on you is actually because of the camera position. And so if you scroll back out, yep, and then click on Set Camera, you'll notice you're on the first step already. And Set Camera is right underneath Add Step. So over on the top left-hand bar, yep, perfect. And so that way it's in the right spot. And so now if you click on step 2, which is where you're at now, cool, we should be good to go. And so on this second step, let's go ahead and start to add that height, that dimension. And so to do that, what we're going to do is click on offset column, which is underneath chart type. Perfect. And we're going to select votes. And so offset column is basically saying how far off of the map do you want to plot a value? What's the maximum offset? And so the one parameter that you need to then define is right next to votes, there's a max offset field. And in that field, just to the right of it, this is one thing I do want to, I'm going to take a quick note of, because I've noticed most people missing that field just because it's blank by default, that you just sort of don't know it's there. But
Yeah, kind of hidden.
yeah, it's sort of just have to click into the black space. But go ahead and this will be in meters. So let's make this like 0.25 meters. And so what you'll notice is that each of these dots starts to raise up, and we can maybe make it a little taller so there's a little more granularity there. Like yeah, that works. 0.3, 0.5, something. Cool. And so now we start to see this this come off of the map. Now, one other thing to note here is that on the very first attribute, it says with a distance from the map of 0.01. And what that means is that for that initial view, those dots aren't resting on the map. Because if they're resting on the map, they'll be obfuscated a little bit. But when we stack, we actually want this connecting line to go down to it. And so what I'd recommend is that with a distance from the map, set that to 0. Perfect. And it'll move the dots a little bit, but they'll still be stacked up. And then what we're going to do is add that bar that connects the dot to the map. And to do that, we're going to click on Connections. And then New Connections. Perfect. And you're doing that within Swarm, which is really cool. You can also do that by clicking on the left-hand side. So either way works, so that's perfect. And this is great. So now what you'll do is up near the top, it says Swarm 1 and then Connection Type. In the connection type, we're going to change from category to scatter drop lines. And I also realized that scatter drop lines might not be a very intuitive term. So might change that. But essentially what scatter drop lines do and why they're called scatter drop lines is we initially created them for scatter plots to connect a line down to the origin. And for maps, it connects the dots to the actual map. And so if that's on a globe, it will connect inwards towards the center point and basically touching the map. So it works for globe and it works for flat maps. And yeah, these are things you can adjust here. And the default to a pretty thin line, which is fine for here. And you can adjust that thickness by adjusting the mobile line width button as well. And there's one small little thing here as well that's I think we logged a bug for, but it's still showing up here, but if you click on swarm, and underneath with a stacked height of, if you can set that to 0, great. So if I don't know if you can tell, but there was a small little thing where there's a line coming out of the dot as opposed to connecting right to it, and that has to do with this stacked height field, and so that's something we are aware of and addressing, but just a small little thing for right now. Just yeah, and it's only in the preview window, and when you actually play back, it's fine. So it's just this preview that it's affected. Cool. All right, so now we've created that second view, which is now accounting for the height of the bars. And so let's go ahead and pass the baton again, and we are going to go to Tyler. And so Tyler, if you can go ahead and share your screen.
Sure thing.
All right, perfect. Thank
Can
you.
you see it?
Yes, you can see your screen. Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and add another step. And so click on Add Step. Perfect. And so you'll know you're on the third step because of that little train track down on the bottom. You're on the third step. Great. And then what we're going to do, this one's, I guess, much easier. But what we're going to do is, I forgot to. So I apologize. I made a rookie mistake, actually. And what I realized we did is if you can click back on step 1 and do that by clicking on the little train track down at the bottom and click on the very first one. Perfect. So you'll notice that the very first one was affected. And so why is that? Does anyone have a suspicion as to why this one is showing up like this, even though we initially plotted it where it was all right on the map?
Is it the visible on this step option or checkbox?
Not quite. You're close though.
Repeat the question again, Michael.
Why is it that this first step, we initially showed it and all the dots were right on the map? Why is it that that's changed, even though we were on step 2 and changing the attributes there? So it's the perspectives. So this can be maybe a little confusing. It's sort of one of the biggest things to recognize is that perspectives are irrespective of steps. And so for every step, you're setting a perspective of the swarm itself. And what we forgot to do is when we created a new step, we forgot to add a new perspective. And so underneath this perspective, you'll notice we have default. And so if you can go ahead and click on new perspective on this first step. Yep, and we'll just label this like starts. Perfect. And so on this perspective, we're going to change this back to how it initially started, which is if we change the max offset, or sorry, the offset column, and set that to none. And so that's going to be right underneath with a stacked height of. There's this field called offset column.
I see.
Yep, and change that back to none. Perfect. So now it goes back to that initial view. And so that's how we initially started things, and that's how it should be shown. And so now if you click on the second step, it will animate to that second view, which was the default perspective, which is that height with the connecting bar. And so now we're on the third step. And so if you can click on the third step for me. Perfect. And now that we're on the third step, we're going to want to create a new perspective from here as well. So that was the thing that was sort of missing there, is that we need to define a new perspective for that swarm for each step. And the reason they're separate is because oftentimes you'll have one swarm that may not change perspectives for many steps, and then you want to change it for a different step, things like that. And so they're different attributes, and so it's something just to be aware of. And so for this perspective name, let's just name this colors, or number 3, or step 3, or anything. Yeah, that works. So Yeah, the actual names don't matter. It's really just for your own reference points. Great. And so for this, what we're going to do is actually change the colors, and we're going to use what's called scaling colors. And so instead of saying color using column in data, we're going to use color using scale value. Yep, great. And then we're going to need to tell it which column to look at. And so for that, we're going to look at the percentage Democrat. So you have used column votes, but instead of votes, there should be a column called percentage Democrat, I believe, if that shows up for you.
Got it. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good. Great. And so since we're showing now the percentage Democrat, which goes from 0 to 1, essentially what we want to say is that if it's closer to 1, that means it's more Democrat, and if it's closer to 0, it's more Republican. And so as a result, what we want to do is instead of showing green to purple, let's change this from to go red to blue. And so if you click on that green box, it will open up a color picker. And on that color picker, we're going to select the value. We're going to select red for that one. Great. And then we'll do on the purple bar, we're going to select blue. Perfect.
Are you just sliding the dot here, Michael?
So for whatever reason, I can't see on your screen share, I don't see the box that shows up. But typically you'll see a dialog box come up where you can select the color or enter in values.
Right.
And that's sort of how to do it that way, if that makes sense.
Oh, I got you. I understand. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, you're good. Yeah. Cool. So we've set that. One sort of minor thing that this is sort of my personal preference is you can change the environment, and especially since we're showing blue, that having a blue background sometimes can conflict. And so if you scroll down on the very left-hand side of the bar, over where, the menu over to the left, you scroll all the way to the bottom, there should be one called Environments. And it looks like perhaps your screen resolution might be a little out of, it's that one that's not quite showing. Let me take a screenshot.
Is it this one down here?
Yeah, it is. I think it must have to do with your screen height resolution. So I'm taking note of that.
Got it.
Great. And for this, let's change the background. So it defaults to this blue lights, which is just this, blue gradients. And let's change it to something else that's a little more fun. The one I've been enjoying lately is, it's called like something that starts with an A. It's like oral, something like that. Or there's also stars. Sorry, I don't see your drop down, so I can't quite say. But
You got Corona, or you got Mountain Dusk.
The Corona one I think looks pretty cool. That's it.
So appropriate, Corona.
I know. Kind of. Yeah, that's fair.
But that is cool.
Yeah, I like that. That's pretty fun. Cool. And there's also you can change the map colors as well. So we can get into that at some point too. Cool. So now we've adjusted the colors of this so that we can see more granularity. And with that, let's go ahead and pass the baton again, and we'll have Evan, if you want to share your screen, we'll have you drive here for a moment.
Sounds good.
Great.
All right, let me know when you guys can see it.
Perfect. We can see your screen. All right, looks good. It's great. It's cool when everyone's on the same step. I love it. Cool. So what we're going to do on this next one is we're going to add a step. So we'll click Add Step. Perfect. And we'll see that we're on the fourth step here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start impacting the size of the dots. So you can see a little more granularity in terms of that vote size. And so to do that, we're going to click on swarm. And we're going to create a new perspective. And we can just label this larger dots. Or I typically actually sometimes just put the step number. So like the number 4 is what I've often been doing as well, just to help me keep track of which perspective goes where. And then that might change, but yeah, just something. So there we go.
Okay.
So if you hit submit, there you go. And so what we're going to do is there's just a small thing to change, which is underneath sizes, where it says sizes using single value. We're going to go ahead and click on scale value. And we're going to scale this based on the number of votes. And so underneath column, we'll select votes. Perfect. And so it defaults to these values of 0.008 up to 0.02, which is like pretty good, but we could actually bump that one up, the max value up a little bit further. You can make it like 0.05 because it's really like LA County. You'll notice is the main driver here, is the max, and so you're basically adjusting everything accordingly. But that's sort of where we're at. The only other thing I'll mention is that one thing I've noticed is when you choose colors. Choosing a color and then moving it a little bit towards like having a little bit more white will make it show up a little more clearly. And so for these colors, if you have the right color, but it still feels a little dark in some sense. And so having a little lighter sometimes makes it just a little easier to see. Yeah. And so that's just another design thing or personal preference. And there's endless iterations we could go through for really making it exact. But I'm not going to get too far down that line, but just so you're aware there. And one other thing, since we're sort of on that topic, there's an advanced mode here that I think is valuable. So if you click on the 3 dots in the very top right-hand corner and then click on advanced, you'll open up the advanced options. You'll see more things here. And the reason I'm showing that is if you scroll down a little bit, underneath colors, you'll see there's a range min and a range max. And so what that means is that it's going to scale the colors from this red to blue based upon whatever the minimum value is, and it's going to set that default to whatever the minimum value is in your data set. But there's some interesting things you could actually do with this. So if you set the range minimum, for example, to 0.49, and then you set the maximum to 0.5, you're essentially doing something similar to what we did before, where it's showing it more binary to a certain degree, besides the ones that are between 0.49 and 0.5, so that you see this distinct color. But then it's also good if you want, sometimes you have one outlier, for example, that like the max value is just way off the charts, but you still want to show that gradient, in between. And so you might set the max lower. And so I just wanted to call that out, just because I think it's a valuable tool to be able to select. And so from this, let's go ahead and set that back to 0 to 1, and that we can go back to what we were trying to do here. Perfect. Great. And then I think we have pretty much rebuilt it. I think there was one last view, but it's basically the exact same thing, but taking away the height. And I don't think we need to go into that, but I do think one thing that will be really valuable to go through is if you scroll all the way down on the page. And what we're going to do is start to defining these labels. And so it's actually not underneath labels, it's actually underneath on rollover. And this means that when you roll over the dots, what shows up? And this is how you show these labels in space. And so you can define any fields. And yeah, exactly. Good recall. So yeah, it's combined to is the name of the field that has the county plus state. And then if you click on that plus sign, and then let's go ahead and I think it's percentage of vote, or percent of vote. And then if we add another fields, so click that plus again, yep, and then so say I think it's party, party. It's like which party won basically. And so to see what this looks like, you need to click on the Run button, which is in the very top of your bar. And when you do that, now when you start rolling over, you'll see the text. And the reason it's rotated that weird way is that I believe you're looking directly down at it, sort of like down at the floor. But if you were to tilt just a little bit, yeah, there you go. That it won't look quite as, or won't be that weird orientation. Because
Michael, where's that run button?
it's up near the top, just to the right of tutorial.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, you're good. And so, yep, that's how you're seeing that. And so some of the nuance here of what you're selecting, if you click back on Swarm, and if you scroll back down to the very bottom, you'll notice that right now it's being separated by these like colons. And so you can actually hit if you delete the colon and to do a character return or hit the Enter key, you're basically creating a character return now. So if you look back at the map or you put your cursor back over one of those dots, you'll see that it's going down a line now. So that's how you can create lines, or if you have like a label, so for example, right before party, and this is a little bit of, I'd say maybe a little workaround-ish, but if you delete the colon and put a percentage sign and then a space, and then if you scroll back over, you'll see that now you see, well, I guess it's incorrect since it's technically times 100 we should do, right? That should be not 0.7, but 70%. So I guess my percentage sign is not accurate there for this instance. But you can start to see how you might be able to add labels like kilograms or meters or whatever the attribute is by putting it in this field after the label itself. So that's sort of what you're doing there. The one thing to note is that what we did is we defined this rollover, and that rollover is defined for that perspective. So what that means is that this rollover is only going to show up if we're on the fourth step because we have this perspective showing. And so if we want to add this rollover to the other steps, we essentially need to click on the other steps or go to those different perspectives that we had set up and then do the same thing. So on where it says on rollover, we basically select the same attributes. So this sometimes can be, sometimes a little frustrating because you have to sort of reapply some of the attributes to multiple steps. And so we are planning to work on something where it makes it a little easier to apply something like this to all steps. But that's sort of where we are right now. And so for this step, if on rollover, if you click show column and then select combine two, yep, and then you got it, yeah, percent of votes and the party.
Well, Michael, quick question, unless this takes you too long, but is there a way to fix the way that the label pops up regardless of the map orientation to the camera?
Yes, and what do you mean by fix?
Well, okay, maybe it's not broken, it's better stated.
Oh, sure,
Is there a way
that's
to
fine.
change no, it's better stated, you're right. Is it to change it so that it doesn't flip horizontally, vertically, so that it stays in toward the view of the viewer? Because I know it's facing toward the camera, I would assume, right?
Yes. Yeah. Right now, it's always trying to face the camera. If you scroll down on the left-hand side of the bar, right-hand side, my apologies. Yep. And then there's this, at the very bottom, it says point select options. And this is the text box. I don't know, point select might actually be a funny way to call that out, so I might change that. So these are the attributes of the actual rollover. And so right now it is dynamic. So you'll see the position dynamic. And what that means is that it looks at where the camera is. And it looks at, I think it's set the default value of 0.9. So essentially it looks at the dot you're clicking on, and then it looks at the camera and it puts the text box 0.9 meters away so that it's sort of always the same size. And then there's a line that connects it to the dot you're pointed at. And what you just clicked on, which is clicking on fixed, essentially sets a fixed position for that text box, and that the line will always connect back to it. So those are the current two attributes or ways we have the functionality. And so what you were describing, where it sort of goes a different direction, I'd say that's actually more of an artifact of the camera angle that you're defining. And that what I would recommend is that for whatever step you're on, just to tilt the camera back a little bit. And if you still want to have the perspective that you're looking directly at the map itself, just don't rotate the map a full 90 degrees, but instead put it at 80 degrees or minus 80 degrees so that it's sort of at a slant, sort of like those, artist tables when you're drawing that you don't want it flat, but instead it's like at an angle. You could basically put the map like that, and that's another way to do it. Does that help address your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the other side of that is if you wanted to create a totally different angle with that perspective still on there, then just do that as a different step and perspective to do that.
Exactly, yeah. And the one thing to note on that specifically is that we've added a field that makes life easier for most, but for what you're talking about is something you have to uncheck. So if you click on map for me, there's a button there that says animate between steps. And what that means, so right now when it's unchecked, if you move the map somewhere new, it's going to move the map for all steps. And the reason we do that is that for the most part, that's what people want. When they move the map to some new position, it's like, okay, this is where I actually wanted it, and I want that applied to all steps. But if you had an instance where you want the map to go up or get really small, and maybe let's just actually do that for one step. So if you click on step 4, and then go ahead and click on add step, and then we're going to click on animate between steps, and then we're going to click on, let's click on maybe scale. Yeah, let's click on scale, which is the very, very bottom. And scale essentially allows you to scale something up or down without affecting the width. And yeah, it's a little sensitive, but yeah, you're getting it. So let's set that, yeah, something like that. There we go. And then, maybe rotate it as well. So just so you guys get a sense for what's going on. And yeah, we can make that something like that. There we go. And so now if you go to step 4, and then you click on the next button, yeah, there you go. You'll see it animate to that next step. And so if you want the map to animate, and this is also applicable for connections, and it's also applicable for text. If you want the thing to move between steps, that's the button you're going to want to check. Yeah.
And it only affects that one, the step you're on, whenever you check that box, correct?
The box is applicable for that object for all steps, but it basically takes into account whatever position the map is in on that step will stay there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. So we basically, here in the hour, rebuilt this election map so you guys can all go apply to CNN, get on the news, and start giving your updates for the next election here. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful to see how that you're able to show things geospatially using latitude and longitude. You got to see a little bit of how you put these on rollover text attributes together. You're also getting to see how you adjust colors using scale, adjusting size using scale. And just a little more familiarity with the moving between perspectives and changing the environment and things like that. And so the last step for all of these is always just to click save and publish. Or if you don't want to publish it just means that anyone with the URL can get to it. Or you can always hit the share button and then share it with just another user in particular. Or actually, if you click on the share button, just one other thing just to be aware of. If you have something that you want to share with someone that doesn't have Flow, but you don't want them to have to sign in, but you still want it to be private, if you click on the Get Sharing link, this is a private link. And what that means is that it's just a very complex hash that people can't guess. And and essentially when you send that to someone, it's sort of like a private access to that flow. So that's another way to get to it, and you can unshare it as well with that. So lots of ways to share it with others, and that is it. So any other questions here or thoughts, comments as we wrap up here? And thank you for sharing your screen here for a little more extended period of time, Evan. I appreciate it.
No worries. I didn't realize I was still doing it.
No, it's great. You look very fluid in the platform, so that was really cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm sharing my screen here a little bit, just at the last part of this, but just so you can. Oops, sorry, keep moving my Zoom window. There we go. So just some of the other details that are in mind, just so you can see sort of some of the differences. One, I'm using a globe instead of a flat map, which sometimes is interesting, or I've been experimenting with a little bit more lately. You don't see the state outlines, unfortunately. That's the one sort of negative. But I don't know. There's something kind of interesting about it, as well as then the dots sort of are separating a little bit more, is the other attribute. And the other thing you'll notice is that I have some text here that is more of like a legend that that updates between steps and things like that. So those are just some of the details, and a lot of it's just colors and formatting, and a lot of these sort of smaller things that are adjusting, and the difference between something that doesn't quite work and works sometimes is just those very small things. So yeah, that is it. Cool. So I really appreciate everyone joining here, and hopefully this was valuable to anything. So as we sort of wrap up here, any other comments or any requests perhaps for next week?
No, this was great, Michael. And I think one request just for future, when you talk about the art as opposed to the science, and there's certainly an artistic element here, if you could show us some of the transitions and the transition timers, and when you're trying to build effect, if I think back to Trump tweets, and it starts out in that big kernel of just dots, and then it takes a very slow transition to spin all of them into probably a 30-meter AR graph. I'm just using an example, but to me, that's pretty powerful. I don't know if it's the next most important thing, but just at some point, understanding those transitions and how to add some of that style would be helpful.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, we'll definitely cover that. So, camera locations and timing of animations between steps. Yeah, agreed. Great idea.
The other thing I was thinking of was the opposite end of that, the more technical side of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about early on about the data being cleaned and being formatted properly, particularly in the lat longitude. I noticed in some of the stuff that I was, kind of just playing around with myself, that was the part that I think if I were to take my own data set, which I tried to do as well, and bring it into the maps that are here, sometimes it wasn't matching up, but I'm 99% sure it was due to that lat long, the way it was, they say the data was in there. So maybe, again, not for the next one, but maybe down the road.
Yeah, no, that's a really good, I mean, yeah, we could spend probably a year talking about all the data transformation stuff almost. But yeah, we should definitely cover a little bit. And one question to you, Joe, on that: would it be data that you'd be comfortable sharing with others, or otherwise I can find other data set to work with?
I've been just pulling stuff out of KO as well. So just using that as demo data. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, if you could share what the data set you're currently working with or having trouble with, just through email, we can use that as sort of maybe a starting point for everybody, and then we can go from there. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, sounds good.
Very good, guys. All right, I got to jump to the next training here, but it's such a pleasure. Thank you guys all for joining, and happy Thanksgiving or early Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much.
Michael. Really cool
Happy
stuff.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. All right, bye.